Aneen, this is Braden Butterfield, back again. We have decided on a name for this podcast. We're going to be calling it the Manoomin Chronicles. This is episode 3. This series is a partnership from the KBIC Natural Resources Department and Manoomin. Wiikwedong, the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, Gete-gitigaaning, the Vieux Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Office for Coastal Management. Today we hear again from some of the attendees of the Newman Restoration Workshop that took place here in KBIC. In this episode we are featuring Nibigushi Lewis, who works in the Conservation Department at LCO, Dean Premo and his wife Bette Premo, who are the founders of the Whitewater Associates. The first questions I gave them what Manoomin meant to them and how it affected their lives.
Well, I guess I said it earlier. It's my teacher. Manoomin is a connection with the Creator, and with that connection, Manoomin teaches. And that is a fundamental thing I think many people need to realize and understand when they go out into the rice beds. They are there, and their teacher is Manoomin. And hopefully bringing this many people together allows more people to be students.
It's important to me. I was introduced to the real wild rice as a food about 35 years ago. Donald Chosa, important person in this community, was a student at that time and gave me some wild rice to try. More recently, it's been an important kind of a habitat feature that I look for when I look at lakes to see whether certain wildlife is going to be there or what fish might be using it. And in fact, I've been planting wild rice in some lakes to help with fish and wildlife habitat in those lakes.
Well, it's become really important to me. I have to go back because a long time ago I went to school and I became what's called a limnologist. And a limnologist is somebody that studies fresh water, like the physical and the chemical and the biological characteristics of fresh water, kind of like oceanography is to oceans. And I didn't realize 40 years later I would be studying a plant, namely wild rice, that really depends on all three of those characteristics of fresh water, the physical, the chemical, and the biological parts. And so what we studied with Keweenaw Bay Indian Community is the fact that, there are things like sulfate in the water that can impact whether that rice will even grow there or not. And the reason, and sulfate is a chemical, right? It's a chemical. And the reason why sulfate is so critical is because in the place where the plants grow is sediment, and this sediment is made out of biological things. It's like dead and decaying organic material from plants that died and animals that died, and there's a lot of bacteria in there. And those bacteria that live there create sulfide out of sulfate, and the sulfide is toxic to the wild rice plant. So you're kind of learning how the chemical part of the water and the biological part of the sediments impact whether this wild rice plant can grow or not.
The second set of questions was what about Manoomin made it an important part of their lives?
Wild rice is the gift from the Creator to the Ojibwe people, and I think beyond that to all people. I mean, it's a lesson where something very obvious is not what it seems. Many people think of it as a weed, and they don't realize that it provides a lot of habitat for fish and insects and birds, on top of the benefit and nutrition that humans get from it. And I think that as an Ojibwe person, it's our responsibility to be good stewards of Manoomin. And so, repeat the purpose of this question. Which one is this one?
What does Manoomin wild rice mean? What does it mean?
So it means, a gift from the Creator, and it's our connection. Manoomin is a connection to Creator, a connection between us and the Creator, a connection between us and its Creator's creation, the birds, the animals, other plants. Fish.
Yeah, my first experience with wild rice happened right here, not far from where we're sitting right now. And I was teaching a class for what was then called Suomi College, now is called Finlandia University. And in my class was a man about my age, Donald Chosa, and he brought me a small bag of wild rice, my first experience with real native wild rice to eat. And he told me how to cook it and how to pop it. And ever since that time, it's been a fascination of mine.
I'm very happy to be here at this conference and to hear other people's interpretations of what they're doing and how they're helping and how critical this plant is to the future.
After that, I asked them what they did in their careers to help Manoomin.
So, being a scientist, what I do is, and the team of people that I work with, is we test water, and we test soil, and we test the water that's in between the soil, like right down in the roots. It's called pore water, right down by the roots of the Manoomin. And maybe in the future we will actually also test the plant itself and the seeds. And in that testing, what we're trying to determine is what are the contaminants that are impacting that plant.
How I interact with wild rice. Let's say it starts in the spring when I go to some of the lakes where I know wild rice exists, where I've planted it, and I start looking for the youngest little green shoots that are coming up. And then back a few weeks later, and I see those shoots are taller and maybe laying down flat on the water now. And then later in August, as it stands erect and starts to produce flowers and seeds. And then in the fall, also, I purchase my wild rice seed from a harvester in Wisconsin, and I am also able to get some eating rice from him. So it's kind of a full season cycle of spring, summer, fall, and then thinking about it all winter long until spring comes again.
I learn from Manoomin. I teach with Manoomin, and I sustain from Manoomin. I go ricing, and I take others ricing, and I try to share what I have learned as a baby student, because I am a baby student when it comes to Manoomin. I don't hold a lot of knowledge. I am trying to learn more, but I think that is really what I do with Manoomin is I sustain from it, I learn from it, and I teach.
I was curious what they hoped to get out of the partnership and what they thought of it.
Yes, we hope to continue working with Keweenaw Bay Indian community and other tribes to study the plant and to understand where it grows best and what we need to do to make sure that it continues to grow and flourish.
Collaboration really is what it means to me. It's a collaboration to forward the stewardship of Manoomin, to be responsible stewardships. I think that more and more government entities are starting to realize what traditional peoples can carry. They have knowledge. There's connections. I remember one of the elders in our community was saying that there's, a connection between the blackbirds and wild rice and the worms, and then there's a connection between muskie and walleye and fish and wild rice, and the connection needs to be remembered. So this, I think, is a collaboration that can bring that connection to life.
We continue to advocate for wild rice as a great habitat feature in the lakes we work on. I'm a lake consultant. I work with lake associations, with people that are concerned about their lakes. And very often they know very little about the native plants in those lakes. And rice, wild rice, is one of the most important of those plants. And so our future will be to try to educate and spread the word about the benefits.
Finally, after everything else, I asked them if they wanted to add anything extra that I didn't, think of, or maybe they had a story that they wanted to tell me.
I remember the first time I was in a Manoomin bed. I wasn't doing the right thing, like most people's stories start. I had walked in the water, and I stood among the Manoomin. And I realized then that in afterthought, that I shouldn't be standing in the Manoomin because I was trampling on roots. But that was what Manoomin was teaching me at the time. But in that moment, that this was a being that needed to be looked at as a being. It has its part to play, as we all have its part to play. And I'll never forget just standing in the water with the Manoomin, just standing in it. I had waders on, obviously. And I just was blown away by the beauty of the plant itself, by the noise of the insects buzzing around it, and by the cool water slapping against my legs. And I knew then I needed to be a good steward of Manoomin.
Well, yeah, I think the one that I was telling about the plants and about how the sulfate can impact whether they grow or not, and the other kinds of things in the sediment that can impact that. I mean, if there's iron in the sediment, it actually can protect the wild rice plant, and at least for a certain part of its life. And so all of these things, both chemical and physical and biological, are all there for a purpose, and they're all interacting to help this plant grow, this plant that's so important for food and for the health of the environment.
Once again, before we stopped recording, I asked what I still think is one of the hardest questions on our list of questions. What Manoomin meant to them in one word.
Life.
Community.
Connection.
This is Braden Butterfield and Keweenaw.